someone posted a meme on my Discord server, which in itself isn't anything unusual, but this one sent me mentally down quite the deep rabbit hole. You see, as a railway artist, I'm trying to bring a very nerdy subject to a broader audience, and you could say I do that with a varying degree of success. And as such a railway artist, or as an artist in general, games like these contain a plethora of valuable lessons. So I set out to get to the bottom of why a gacha game about horse racing becomes such a success out of seemingly nowhere, while their steely counterparts seem to be relegated into the shadow realm for good. However, it's going to be difficult to pretend that all of these hours were just for research purposes. Oh well, moving on. In case you're not familiar with the game in question. Oh boy, you're about to enter a brand new world. I could of course pretend that it's the 21st century and I'm talking to the internet, that everybody knows what a cat girl is, and start from there. But keeping my viewer demographics in mind, that's probably only the case for half of you, so let's start a bit more direct. That's an Musume, which directly translates from Japanese to English as horse girl. Let that sink in, don't ask any questions, and don't think too hard about it. Alright, in that game you take on the role as a trainer, and your goal is it to guide your trainee, said horse girls, well. Those characters, by the way, are all based on actual real-life racehorses, which in some cases does raise some questions, but that's not the video for that. So it's up to you to make the right choices and what type of training to pursue, so that your trainee reaches her career goals, which the game gives you already, and ideally even go beyond that. But that's not actually what that game is about, that's just the core game mechanic. But we'll come back to that later. Horse racing is in many ways linked to the railways. Not only used railways to be the fastest way to bring the racehorses to the races, as such many railway companies kept a fleet of well-equipped horse boxes, which besides the actual boxes always also had a compartment for an employee to look after the horses during the ride. And one of the more modern types, in quotation marks, are those built for the Deutsche Reichsbahn in 1936. 5 of them were built as the successors of the old Prussian Horse Boxes, which only had 3 axles. And last but certainly not least, especially in Great Britain, it was common practice to name express locomotives after racehorses. And it's not really a surprise, as if you think about it, the iron horses superseded their soft-tissued cousins in pretty much every field except for sports. You know, locomotive racing isn't really that easy to do, and even more expensive than horse racing is. And seeing as many locomotives were named after racehorses and how locomotives tend to be humanized, yeah, you get where I'm going. Mistake number 1. But if you now think Musume is actually about horse racing, you're entirely wrong. It doesn't matter what unhealthy amounts of carrots and carrot-related foods get eaten in that game. It's about human-esque characters and social interaction. Without trying to turn this video into a therapy session, one thing about the characters sticks out to me. The meticulous way of how the characters are described, right down to small details like gestures and speech rhythm. How all of that perfectly matches up their personality and creating maybe a bit over the top, but still believable and very realistic character. That tells me one thing. These characters are not just meant to be lovable, they are just as much meant for the players to see themselves in. Or at least in one of them. That will even become more important later on, by the way. And when I bring it all back to my locomotive models, I mean, I've really tried, but you know, whenever I try to talk to them, they are just quietly judging me. And to be fair, it's also quite difficult for me to really put myself into their shoes, tires. Odd. So are you saying we should... just the thought about it scares me, and what would the Japanese term for that even be? A big draw of Uma Musume, and besides the characters, maybe the biggest, are their empowering stories. Take notes here. Both the predetermined backstories and the stories you experience with them together during the gameplay, which I suppose is what you call trauma bonding. And coming back to finding yourself in at least one of those characters. Their dreams are all of a sudden a reflection of your own. Big dreams, immeasurable effort. Sounds familiar. That's something where you have no shortage of in railway history. I mean, that's what my whole channel is built upon, and that's what generally makes for a successful video. And in the context of model railways or train sims, you can even continue a locomotive story yourself. And trauma bonding does also apply here. Okay, that's not quite as fun as it was with the ice cream music. Oh! Full marks, sit back down. Except that I'm talking from the perspective of a Fachidiot here. German loanwort, by the way. While I'm, and apparently also more than 70,000 other people, are guilty of being taken in awe by the story of a rattling Volkswagen, I do understand, at least a little bit, that you need to have some personal preconditions for this to affect you in that way. While the Uma Musume stories, on the other hand, are way more relatable to many more people. And unless we create... scrap that. There's just no way around that. Even though some railway stories are very tragic and very dramatic, if you have no affection to locomotives, and that's not a natural thing to have, just accept it. They're not going to affect you in that way. While affection to other humans or humanoid beings is something that every human, or at least almost every human, possesses. But alright, you now ask, Tony, how does that now apply to what you're doing on YouTube with your railway models? Well, there isn't really too much I can do about that core issue I've just tried to describe here. And no, scrap that thought right away. But there is something for me to learn. So far, I approached my videos in a way where I removed myself as much as possible from them. So my personality wouldn't distract from my models and their prototypes. But it always should have been obvious to me, but it certainly is now that this wasn't the right approach, and something I certainly have to rethink. Mistake number 2. Uma Musume is a gacha game. It is free to play, but has in-game transactions. But if you now think it's a pay-to-win game, you're actually wrong. Unless, of course, you think collecting new trainees is the actual purpose of that game, which, given my previous deliberations, I can't blame you. Collecting things is something very human. Give somebody an incentive to collect something, preferably something pretty, something shiny, and they will do so. And the developers of that game know that too. So they don't have to force you to spend money through annoying game mechanics, but can only be really overcome by spending money. Because on one hand, that would really hinder the growth of a healthy community. But on the other hand, they very well know that some people, and just by the way, in case there's a misunderstanding here, I'm certainly not advocating for you to put your money into a virtual slot machine. Be mindful about what you do, okay? But some people will very willingly put their life savings on the line if that's the only way to complete their collection. Even if it's not at all necessary to have fun in that game or even to beat that game. Of course, there's no way around it. Getting a new character opens up a new story, a new game path, and getting better cards, of course, makes your life a little bit easier, but it's only really necessary if you're playing very competitive. In other words, saying you need to spend money to be good at that game is a bit like saying you need an expensive camera. a phone to take good photos. In other words, it's an excuse. And in many ways, it's just like with our all model railway collections. It's not that we don't already have more than what we know what to do with, but we still tell ourselves that this one locomotive, this one character will make all the difference. While in reality, the most enjoyment we will ever get out of this deal is knowing that we have it, not actually having it. And we know that. We perfectly know that, but yet we do it again and again. I guess that's why model railway companies are still in business. And why gacha games are so successful. No clue how that could apply to a YouTube channel though. Maybe 3D printing could help me with that here. Evil laughter. That's what's written on my notes. No clue who put it there. Mistake number 3. If you now think I have a plan of how to wrap all of my previous ramblings into a beautiful bouquet of a conclusion, you're wrong. Oh, you're absolutely wrong. If you have been watching my channel for a while, you're probably aware that my approach to railways and model railways in particular is quite different from the norm, quite different from what all the experts would preach you how to approach model railways. At least I quietly hope you are aware of that, and it pains me to say that, so far my videos haven't made it quite as obvious as I would like. I won't go too much into the reasons behind that, but mostly it's due to the available time to me, as at the end of the day I'm still only one person creating the models in Blender, rigging and animating them, researching, planning the videos, recording them, editing them, fighting with 2 brand new 3D printers, and with an imagination reaching beyond the known universe. The latter one is probably the most energy draining of all of them. But chasing one video after another, all too often I lost sight of my actual goal. Or at least pushed it to the side. For now, I will come back to it later, I told myself. But going on to a foray, I'm back at Musume, that has historically not necessarily been my cup of tea and might even seem a bit out of character for me, has reminded me, and it has taught me, a lot as a YouTuber, as an artist, as a creator. It has given me some answers, but with them also many new questions I have yet to answer. As one thing has always been clear, the vision I have in mind for my models and my channel is not something that has been done before, or at least not to my knowledge. It might be a homage to and be inspired by other creators and creations. Of course, that's how art works, but ultimately, I want to reach beyond that and have to find an entirely new way of approaching railways. And that's something I'm excited for. But that is also a long and messy process of figuring things out. But that being said, I'm closer to it than I ever was before. And no, before some of you start to panic, I'm not planning of turning my models into a gacha game. However, what I am planning from here on out, that my channel will significantly change. It has to, there is no way it can continue like that. Rendering and animating my models was always only just an intermediate solution, before I was ready to go into 3D printing. And so from here on out, I want to focus on actual physical 3D printed models. And while of course their prototype stories will always be a core part of my videos, I will bring more attention to the actual models themselves, sharing my work process as well as sharing the features of the physical models as part of their own universe, instead of just being stand-ins for the prototypes without their own voice, which way too many models are these days. And just to be clear, I don't mean voice in a literal way, but in an artistic way. And of course, many of you have been asking and wishing that for a long time, you will be able to access my model files too, and will be able to print them for yourself. So I will also make guides on how to do that, to make that process as easy as I possibly can. That is my dream. And it is about to turn reality. Alright, now I have a hoarse voice. Symboli Rudolph would be proud of me.